Hi, murder siblings. Welcome back to another podcast episode. I'm Jana Rawls.
And I'm Mackenzie.
And together we are
The Murder Sisters.
Today we have a chilling story for you about a little girl who was brutally assaulted and murdered by someone she loved and trusted. At only 4 years old, she'd never get to live the life she dreamt, and her family would never get to watch her grow up into something wonderful because her life was stolen. This is the story of Ella Bennett. In 2002, when Ella Bennett was born, her brother Paris was an 8-year-old boy. By all accounts, he was pretty upset about the thought of having a sibling and was very angry about it. He never wanted to talk about the baby coming and just felt a sense of hostility towards his sister before she was even born. But luckily, all that seemed to change when Ella was born. He stepped into the role of a big brother, and to everyone's surprise, he actually enjoyed it. There are numerous home videos of Paris and Ella playing together and doing things that we all do with our siblings. Everything was very normal, but sadly, things would not be normal for long. He would go on to eventually murder his baby sister.
That's terrible. Did he do this out of the blue, or were there, indications that this might be building up, this, resentment against her?
There were signs, but the signs had been there long before Ella was even born. Charity, his mom, mentioned some of these signs in her memoir, How Now, Butterfly, a memoir of murder, survival, and transformation. She recalls when Paris was just 3 years old, he had collected a bucket of frogs. But rather than playing with them or collecting them like most kids do, Paris was taking the frogs and throwing them off of a balcony and eagerly watching them splatter onto the ground below.
Oh my god, that is horrible. Oh my goodness.
She had to explain to her son that the froggies were in pain and that it was cruel to leave them alive and suffering. She insisted that they kill the frogs to put them out of their misery, but Paris was not interested in stopping their suffering. He refused, and she had to kill all the frogs herself.
Oh my god.
Unfortunately, Charity was not always the best mom either. She had years-long history of heroin, drug abuse, and dependency. This was before Paris was born. She actually cleaned up just before becoming pregnant with him. She claims that he saved her life because she was actually in a state of depression and she thought it was so hard to be sober that life shouldn't be this hard, but she also didn't want to relapse. And she had made a pact with herself to commit suicide if she wasn't feeling better after a certain amount of time, and she was almost to that deadline when she became pregnant. So she does, in her memoir, say that he actually saved her life. But when Paris was 11 years old, she actually relapsed on drugs, but this time it wasn't heroin use, it was cocaine. Reporting suggests that she was only using for about 6 months, but Paris had since made statements about how angry he was at her relapse. So while his life wasn't full of rainbows and butterflies, neither was Charity's. I'm going to quickly give you a bit of background information so you can better assess the situation of the messy family dynamics in this Paris and Charity family. From an early age, Charity was exposed to violence. At only 6 years old, her dad had actually been murdered. He was shot several times in the back of the head, execution style. While Charity's parents had been separated for quite some time, at this point in her life, the couple had remarried just 57 hours before the murder in a whirlwind trip to Vegas where they tied the knot. Due to the newly formed marriage, Kyla, Charity's mother, was in line to inherit a lucrative trucking business upon his untimely death. She was eventually charged with murder for hire and plotting to have her husband killed.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy. Did she go to prison, or what happened? What happened to Charity?
So, actually, Kyla ended up being acquitted of all charges when the jury came back in with a non-guilty verdict. though many people, including Charity, believe they got it wrong and she is in fact guilty. In the documentary The Family I Had, she made the statement, "I charmed the jury," leaving several to speculate that she indeed arranged her husband's murder and got away with it.
Wow, that's crazy. She got away with that. If she could do that, I'd be willing to bet she wasn't the best mother to Charity either, like leading her to pick up the same poor parenting that she received.
I imagine you're correct. It's hard to be a great parent when you never had a role model for that. And since Charity only ever had one parent after the age of 6, I imagine she learned all she could from her mother. But anyways, back to Paris. The frogs at age 3 wasn't the last time he showed violent tendencies. On the same documentary, The Family I Had, Kyla mentions that a year before his violent attack on Ella, he was admitted into a mental health facility for attempting to stab his mother. The San Antonio Current reports that Paris and Ella were playing together, and Paris broke a toy they were playing with. Charity got onto him and placed him in timeout. She stepped away from the situation briefly, and the housekeeper ran out of the door shouting that Paris had a knife. When Kyla and Charity got to Paris, he was waving the knife around at them. Kyla ended up wrestling him and getting the knife away from him, and Charity hugged him with a warm embrace, and then he collapsed onto the floor. Paris ended up going to a mental health facility after that because of his violence, because of the knife incident. And allegedly, Charity was told by the facility that he had homicidal tendencies and was an active threat. They wanted to keep him longer to assist with treatment for him, but she was certain that they got it wrong and was ready to bring him home. Charity didn't share this with the other family members until after Ella's horrific slaying. She claims that she doesn't believe leaving Paris at that facility at that time would have changed the events that unfolded only a year later. After he was arrested for the murder of his sister, his file from the facility was entered into his record where they revealed the doctor's documentation. And I quote, "He is obsessed about shooting and killing. Homicidal/suicidal ideation."
Oh my gosh. So she should have known something bad was going to happen. Like, she should have locked him up and thrown away the key.
It's sad, but how could she have believed that about her own son? I mean, she loved and cared for him since the day he was born. Like, I wasn't there, but it's hard for me to think as a mother that you could just accept that and take it as fact, like there's nothing you can do about it. I think for a lot of parents, including me, I'd be reluctant to believe that about one of your kids. It's unfortunate that she did actually have that heads up, and this all still happened, but since we've never really experienced that, like, I don't want to judge her for that, you know?
Yeah, I guess you're right. That still sucks, though. That's almost unbelievable.
I know. It's so sad. And the crime against baby Ella was just brutal. On February 4th, 2007, Paris Bennett was at home with his sister while his mom, Charity, went to work. At the time, she was a waitress at Buffalo Wild Wings. They had a babysitter that night. She was a 21-year-old university student. She took the kids out for Chinese food for dinner, and then they watched the cartoon movie Alice in Wonderland together before Ella's bedtime. Then she tucked Ella into bed, and Paris went to his room to do some homework. At around 10 p.m., Paris persuaded the babysitter that he was going to be fine alone with Ella until their mom got home, and since Ella was sleeping, she could go ahead and go home for the night.
Wait a minute. Why would a babysitter who's being paid by the mother, well, at least I'm assuming, get talked into leaving by the child she's babysitting? That is insane. Like, you had one job.
Yeah, it's super strange to me too, and honestly, a lot of reports don't really seem to focus on this very much. They just kind of take it at face value, like, oh, okay, well, he convinced her to leave. But it's weird for sure. But, I mean, let's just assume that he was very convincing, and honestly, she was probably thinking that she wasn't there to babysit him. She was there for Ella. So, when he said he could take it from there, like, I don't know, maybe he had done that before. Maybe she leaves early sometimes after Ella's in bed. I couldn't really find anything that said. But, aside from all of that, it was also the night of the Super Bowl. And, like I mentioned, she was a 21-year-old college student, so maybe she had a party to get to or something. You never know. And my last theory about the whole situation could have something to do with the fact that he had a really high IQ level, 141. And anything above 140 is considered a genius. So this kid, who's literally a genius, however he does it, he talks his way into being left alone with Ella, and he convinces her to go home. Sometime before 11:30 p.m., and after the babysitter had left, sometime around 10 p.m., he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed his baby sister 17 times after mercilessly beating her and strangling her. He called 911 to report the crime at 11:42, but before making the call, he actually called a friend from school and chatted with them for about 6 minutes. Reports indicate that he discussed the incident and he admitted that he had done something that might make his mom mad. He then waits 2 more minutes after his 6-minute phone call before calling 911. Here's part of the call he made.
Hello? Abilene 911, go ahead.
I was hallucinating.
You were hallucinating?
Yes. I woke up and I thought she was a demon and I killed her.
Now, what's your sister's name?
Her name is Ella Bennett.
How old is Ella?
4.
She's 4 years old? How old are you?
13.
Is she bleeding anywhere?
Yes, she's bleeding all over the bed. Because I stabbed her.
What did you stab her with?
Knife.
Okay, where'd you stab her?
Lots of places.
He sounds genuinely upset. It sounds like he's crying. Like, he says he hallucinated in part of the call. Maybe he really was hallucinating. Was he been to a mental facility before, right?
Yeah, he had been to a mental facility before, and he does sound really upset. I thought the same thing at first, but sadly, this was actually just a boy who was really good at sounding concerned, because later in the 911 call, the operator walks him through CPR, which at first he was pretty resistant to do, but he eventually agrees to perform it on his sister. He can be heard counting to the rhythm when you perform CPR, like I always use the tune Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. But he counts, indicating that he's attempting CPR. Or perhaps it's something more sinister, which is what investigators are led to believe happened in this case. He pretended to perform CPR to look innocent and remorseful.
No way.
So when the investigators find her, she's on her side still, with many stab wounds to her back and very little blood on the floor. And with that many stab wounds on her back, if he had been performing CPR, she would have leaked blood out onto the floor.
Wow, that is horrible. So he just actually didn't even try to save her? I mean, I guess he was good at pretending because the call sounded so genuine. Like, he sounded so remorseful and scared for his little sister.
I know. Isn't that scary? They would later label him as a psychopath, and going through the motions of these heavy emotions is one of the things that psychopaths are good at.
Yeah.
But they never actually truly feel them. Guilt and remorse, those are not something that psychopaths are capable of.
That's so crazy.
So he was arrested that night, and police had to go to Buffalo Wild Wings to break the news to Charity. They first told her that Ella had been hurt. She was in a haze and ready to get out of there because she needed to be with her daughter. She thought if Ella was hurt, she would want her mom. The investigators then had to tell her that she hadn't survived the injuries. She was actually deceased. Charity's mind immediately went to Paris, and she started asking about where he was, what happened to Ella, and if he was still okay. Then they were forced to deliver the third bad news and let her know that while he is okay and still alive, he had been arrested because he was actually the reason that Ella had died. He murdered her. Paris would tell the police and his mother that he was in a state of psychosis when he stabbed his sister. He was hallucinating that she was a flaming pumpkin-headed demon. And he was so startled and scared because he was asleep next to her and woke up to this demon in bed that he had to kill the demon to save himself. The investigation found that Paris had not only choked, beat, and stabbed his baby sister, but he sexually assaulted her as well.
No.
Police found semen on the bed where Ella had been lying as well as in the shorts that Paris was wearing that night. In Charity's memoir, she recalls that he later admitted the more violent he became, the more excited he became, ending in death for her and climax for him.
That's disgusting. That baby was 4 years old, and that was his sister. How the heck do you climax and still claim it was an accident, that you were hallucinating?
Exactly. Obviously, they didn't believe him. Charity confronted him once. After she found out about the semen, she told him that she knew he had done this on purpose and he was lying about it being an accident. Still, he's only a child of 13, so he grew quiet for a moment. Kind of what you'd expect a 13-year-old to do when confronted with the truth. But then something inside of him shifted and he began laughing and said, "Well, it took you fucking long enough."
That's horrible.
That's nuts, right? When she asked him about the semen, he actually grew angry. He flipped the table towards her and punched a wall on his way out the door. He refused to talk about it that day. Still to this day, he doesn't talk about Ella very much. He has basically said in interviews and things, he's shut that part of his life out. He would later admit to police that he was not in a state of psychosis, that he woke up that morning with a perfectly clear mind and intended to, at first, murder his mother. But after some consideration, he realized that the best way to hurt her would be to take away one of her kids.
That's horrible.
And if he murdered Ella, he would take away both her kids from her because Ella would be dead and he would be in prison. And he would put her through the most amount of pain that he could possibly inflict upon her.
A true psychopath.
Exactly. He admitted to wanting to punish her for relapsing on drugs, even though at the time of the murder she was allegedly clean. He stated in past interviews that he was suspicious that she had actually relapsed again, fueling his anger and hostility towards her, though she denies that and says it's absolutely not true.
That's horrible.
Yeah. He once said, "For many years, there was just this hot, flaming ball of wrath in the pit of my stomach, and it was directed at my mother. And one of the reasons why I chose to kill my sister and not someone else is because I knew that by doing that, I could hurt my mother in the worst possible way, because I had always known, as a child, that the most devastating thing to my mother would be the loss of one of her children, and I found a way to take both her children in one fell swoop."
That's nuts. Like, he chopped off his own nose just to spite his face.
Yeah.
That is horrible.
That's essentially exactly what he's doing, sentencing himself to prison just to punish her. Not only were his motives to hurt his mother, but his search history from his computer would later be revealed. It was reported that he had spent hours before the horrific crime looking up and watching violent porn. I imagine this fueled his evil desires, and since he was home alone with his sister, he could act on his sick fantasies and ultimately end his sister's life. After first getting off on all the pain that he had inflicted her.
I bet that babysitter feels horrible.
I bet she does too.
Like, thinking about that, I bet she feels really bad.
I bet she does too, but really in my research, I didn't find a whole lot on her, but I had the same train of thought, like, I wonder how she's doing today.
Yeah.
Because if that was me, it would eat me alive, knowing that
What happened after she left?
She was convinced to leave by the psychopath who killed his sister.
The psychopath child.
The psychopath child who killed his sister, yeah.
This is like an 8th grade boy.
Exactly.
He's nuts.
So unfortunately, since he was only 13 at the time of the crime, and in Texas a child must be 14 to be tried as an adult, he was tried and sentenced as a juvenile and received 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is actually the maximum sentence for a juvenile in Texas. At 19, he was transferred to an adult prison. He's currently in the Ferguson unit in Huntsville.
I was reading it before you were doing that. I read Ferguson. I was like, man, he's in Huntsville.
Yeah, I know. I put that in there because I knew you and I know where the Ferguson unit is.
Yep.
So he's residing at the Ferguson unit in Huntsville. He'll become eligible for parole in 2027.
No!
Yes.
It's just like, I don't think psychopaths, legally declared psychopaths, I don't think they should be eligible for parole ever. Because those people don't change. No matter, they're going to convince you they've changed because they're a psychopath.
That's right.
And I don't think they should be eligible for parole ever.
Yeah, but listen to this. Even if he doesn't get parole, if he's denied every single year, he's still going to get out in February of 2047. I mean, which is still 20 years away, but
I'm still going to be alive in that time, and I don't like that.
he's going to be 53 years old. That's not that old. How much damage can you inflict? At 50, you're not walking with a cane. You're not walking with a walker.
Yeah.
Some 50-year-olds, go for morning runs every day. Like, they could still take down somebody.
Yeah,
This could be a 50-year-old man out murdering people.
Yeah, your dad is slaying the day away. He's in like his 70s.
Yeah, he's in his 70s, and he just remodeled his house.
Yeah.
The outside of his house, like he just did his whole new siding. It's nuts.
slaying the day away.
It's slaying the day away, and and here this guy's gonna...
53-year-old man is going to go kill some more kids.
Yes, this 53-year-old
Inflict
psychopath.
some more pain, apparently.
That's right.
It's horrible.
Anyways, also, Charity has another son now, named Phoenix, and now Charity says that if he ever gets out, she's scared for her and her son's life.
Yeah, I would be too.
Yeah, so would I. And also, like you were saying earlier, even the professionals that have evaluated him agree that it's unlikely that he could ever be rehabilitated, and if he was released from prison, he would likely be a danger to society.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
psychopaths don't change.
But how do you...
Especially him.
Yes, but the laws are the laws. That was the maximum sentence. They can't be like, well, sorry, you're the exception to the rule. Here's what you can only be given this sentence of 40 years, but we're going to keep you locked up anyways.
I think we should start an act. You know how they got like the Civil Rights Act, stuff like that? I think we should... Civil rights was the only thing that came to my mind. We're doing that in history right now. Anyways, I think we should start an act like the Psychopaths Act. And if you're legally declared a psychopath, you will never get released. Sorry, you're going to be in maximum security till you're like 70. And when you're 70, you can go to maximum security, like mental institution. Yeah. You can live out the rest of your days in slanted door frames.
We'll look into it. So Paris has been quoted saying some pretty terrible things. He wrote to his counselor once in prison, and I quote, "Another key motive for my offense, I wanted to see someone die."
That is horrible.
Yeah, creepy,
He just
right?
openly admits it like that, too.
Yeah, that's a psychopath for you. They don't feel guilt or remorse.
Yeah.
Like, they're not ashamed. The interviewers who've talked to him personally say that he has this flat effect and just, like, is very nonchalant, not caring about anything. He talks about Ella and the murder of Ella in the same way he might talk about buying a new car. It's just matter of fact. Like,
That's
there's
horrible.
nothing. It's nuts. He also recalled to detectives that when he stabbed Ella, he would pull the knife out slowly and that it felt like stabbing a mattress or a marshmallow.
Ew.
Yeah. Charity recalled when she asked him why he didn't kill her too. He responded, "It would have put you out of your misery, and this way you're going to suffer forever."
That is spoken like a true psychopath.
I mean, yeah, obviously this kid has a lot of hatred for his mom, but it doesn't...
She didn't even really do anything to fuel this.
Well, first off, I will play devil's advocate and say we don't know what their home life looked like. She had a history of drugs.
Yeah.
Probably with that comes seedy people in and out of their life. We don't know. The reporting doesn't suggest that he was sexually assaulted, but a lot of times when you have seedy people, you could be sexually assaulted.
Yeah. Things happen.
Like, we don't know the full damage of the upbringing that she did to him. I'm sure, I'll play the devil's advocate the other way too. I'm sure she did the best that she could. She didn't have the best role model. Her mom probably hired somebody to kill her dad.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that was her role model. So maybe she did better than her mom did. But without a good role model, it's hard for you to make the right choices because you never got showed the right choices.
Yeah.
So you do the best you can. I'm sure she did the best she could, but we don't know how it was for him. And clearly, he has a lot of anger and resentment towards her. And maybe she didn't do anything wrong. Maybe she really was a great parent. And maybe she wasn't. But even if she wasn't, I know lots of people who have crappy moms or dads, and they still turned out like okay people. They didn't murder anybody, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not justification for his actions, for sure. Anyways, so Paris also admitted, and I quote, "Even during the time that I was stabbing her, I was struggling with myself to stop."
They just keep getting worse.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's true. Because remember, he didn't perform CPR on her, and he had a 6-minute phone call after he killed her with his friend, so obviously he didn't care that she was laying there dead on the floor.
Yeah.
Maybe she wasn't even dead. Maybe she was still barely alive, and he could have saved her if he had called CPR, if he had called 911 and performed CPR.
But he called 911 and did not perform CPR.
He called
his
911
friend.
after he called his friend and pretended to perform CPR.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Anyways, yeah, so I don't know that he was really struggling with himself, but he claims he was.
He's using that IQ to his advantage, trying to make people
Yeah.
pity him.
For sure. Manipulation. So he eventually stated in a public interview, "Yes, I did commit a monstrous crime, but does that one mistake define my entire life?
Yes,
I don't think it does."
it definitely does.
That just gives me chills to say.
It
Yes,
definitely does
It
define
defines
your
your
entire
whole life.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Nobody will ever see him for anything else other than the man who committed
The baby killer?
the heinous crime against his baby sister. Yeah, and got off on it.
Exactly.
Gross. So in 2021, Charity finally gave up her communication and contact with Paris after finding out he was in a relationship with a woman who was arrested for a mass shooting.
Oh my god.
But she was out on bond and living only a couple of hours away from Charity. She was, so she was scared, obviously, of her son, of this
She committed a mass shooting, and now her son,
Woman.
who's trying to get back at her, is dating the mass shooting
That's
lady.
right. Yes,
I would be scared too.
Yeah, so she stated, "I finally accepted that it is okay to love him as my son, but really dislike the man he has become." For a full list of our references, please visit themurdersisters.com.
Music written and performed by Clay Weiss and J.P. Greenlee.
Bloopers.
Like, how could you think he murdered his sister? Is there, proof, or...
He admitted to murdering her on the 911 call.
My god!
They would later label him as a psychopath.
The child needs to get sent to the old Sparky. It's not funny, I'm being for real. What if I performed the music?
You didn't.
Music written by Clay Weiss and performed by Mackenzie, because I'm really cool.